It all started on an April morning in Madrid, while I was checking some emails in my office in Castellana. The sun was streaming through the 15th floor windows, and I was focused on the marketing campaign for the new Pozuelo shopping center. My phone vibrated on the glass desk. It was Carlos, my husband. "Mari. You won't believe what I got." His voice sounded excited, like a child who just received a gift. "Do you remember that new restaurant in the Salamanca neighborhood, Le Petit Jardin? The one with the 3-month waiting list?" Of course he remembered. It was the topic of conversation at all work meetings since its opening. Chef Michel Dubois had decided to open his first restaurant outside of France, and all of Madrid's high society was desperate to get a table. "Well, I've gotten a reservation for tonight," Carlos continued. My heart skipped a beat. We had been joking for weeks about getting a table there. And there was that always changes everything. My mother is also coming. In fact, she was the one who got the reservation through her contacts at the golf club. The enthusiasm evaporated as quickly as it had come. Dona Carmen, my mother-in-law, the eternal thorn in my side for 5 years. The woman who has never forgiven her son for marrying a simple publicist from Vallecas instead of one of the heiresses she had in mind. As Carlos continued to talk about the details, my mind traveled to all the awkward moments we had shared. The Christmas dinners where he subtly commented that my way of holding cutlery was not proper. The birthdays where her gifts always came with a card suggesting she could upgrade my wardrobe. The family gatherings where she casually mentioned Carlos's ex-girlfriends and their successful careers abroad. "Mari? Are you still there?" Carlos' voice brought me back to the present. Yes, sure. "What time is the reservation?" I asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "At 9. We'll pick you up at the office at 8:30. Typical of Dona Carmen, deciding plans without consulting me, as if my time were less valuable than hers. After hanging up, I looked at my reflection on the blank computer screen. At 32 years old, I had built a successful career from scratch. She was an account director at one of the most important advertising agencies in Madrid, had a master's degree in digital marketing, and had just closed the largest account of the year. But none of that mattered for Carmen Monteverde de Ruiz, who only saw the girl who grew up in a modest apartment in Vallecas. I spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings and calls, but my mind was on the upcoming dinner. At 7, I closed the laptop and took out the emergency kit that I always kept in the bottom drawer of the desk. I changed my suit for the black dress I had bought on my last trip to Paris. It was a classic Chanel, elegant and sober, which had cost me 3 months of salary. I had been saving it for a special occasion, and this seemed like the perfect time. The office women's locker room became my headquarters. I loosened the professional bun I had been wearing for the day, letting my brown hair fall in soft waves over my shoulders. The discreet daytime makeup gave way to a more sophisticated look, red lips, smoky eyes, but without excesses. Carmen always said that women who wore too much makeup seemed from a different type of neighborhood. Maria, my assistant, found me putting the finishing touches on my image. "Boss, it's spectacular," he said with a knowing smile. She knew my situation with Carmen well. She had witnessed enough tense calls and scathing comments. "Dinner with the mother-in-law?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "At Le Petit Jardin, no less," I replied, adjusting the pearl earrings Carlos had given me on our first anniversary. At 8:30 sharp, Carmen's black Mercedes stopped in front of the building. Carlos got out to greet me with a kiss, while his mother remained in the back seat, examining me through the tinted glass. "You look beautiful," Carlos whispered as he opened the door for me. The inside of the car smelled of Chanel No. 5, Carmen's signature fragrance. "Maria del Carmen," she greeted me, using my full name as she always did, even though everyone called me Mari. "What interesting choice of dress for a casual dinner." His tone suggested he had made a protocol error, although he knew better than that. "Good night, Carmen," I responded with a practiced smile. "The dress is from the latest Chanel collection. I thought it would be appropriate for Le Petit Jardin." The ride to the restaurant was an exercise in self-control. Carmen filled the silence with comments about her friends at the golf club, all with compound surnames and noble titles. Carlos was trying to maintain a neutral conversation about work, while I looked at the lights of Madrid through the window, mentally reviewing the names of the French wines so as not to make any mistakes when ordering. Le Petit Jardin occupied a restored mansion in the heart of the Salamanca neighborhood. The Art Nouveau facade was discreetly lit, and a small army of valets in impeccable uniforms waited at the entrance. Our car joined the line of luxury vehicles waiting their turn. The maître d', a middle-aged Frenchman with a perfectly trimmed mustache, greeted us at the entrance. "Good evening, do you have a reservation?" "Yes, in the name of Carmen Monteverde de Ruiz," my mother-in-law responded with that tone she reserved for occasions when she wanted to impress. The maître d' consulted his iPad with a worried expression. "Madame Monteverde? One moment, please." The minutes that followed were a nightmare in slow motion. The maître d' returned with a contrite expression. "My sincere apologies, madam, but it seems there has been an error with the reservation. We only have a table for 2 people tonight." Carmen's smile froze on her face. "There must be a mistake. I spoke personally with Jean-Philippe this morning." "I am very sorry, madam. Mr. Jean-Philippe had to leave urgently for Paris this afternoon. It seems there was a misunderstanding with the reservation. We have a perfect table for 2 people, but unfortunately we cannot accommodate 3 tonight." It was then that Carmen showed her true nature. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he turned to me. "Well, Maria del Carmen, maybe you could look for a restaurant more, at your level. There's a pretty decent daily menu place near your office, right?" The silence that followed was deafening. The other diners waiting in the lobby pretended not to listen, while the maître d' concentrated intensely on his iPad. Carlos, as always when his mother showed her cruelest side, was paralyzed, trapped between his loyalty as a son and his duty as a husband. "Of course, Carmen," I responded with a calmness I didn't feel. "Enjoy dinner." I turned around and walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, aware that every pair of eyes in the lobby was following me. The valet asked me if I needed a taxi, but I shook my head. I needed to walk, I needed air, I needed to process what had just happened. The streets of the Salamanca neighborhood were full of people dining on the terraces, laughing and enjoying the spring night. I passed luxury shops with illuminated windows, exclusive restaurants and historic buildings. Every step I took, every breath I took, fueled something new inside me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shame. It was determination. My phone vibrated several times in my bag, messages from Carlos, I assumed. I didn't read them. Instead, I opened my contact list and started scrolling until I found a name, Sophie Martin. I had met her 2 years ago, when my agency handled the launch of her first restaurant in Madrid. She was now one of the most respected chefs in the city, and more importantly, she was my friend. As I walked towards the nearest subway stop, an idea began to take shape in my mind. Carmen Monteverde de Ruiz wanted to play with social class and status. Well, I would teach him exactly what real class means. The metro ride from the Salamanca neighborhood to my apartment in Chamberí gave me time to think. The almost empty carriages at that time of night were the perfect setting to begin planning my revenge. I took my Moleskine notebook out of my bag and started writing, the ideas flowing like an overflowing river. My phone kept vibrating. This time I looked at it, 15 missed calls from Carlos and 3 voicemails. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened WhatsApp and searched for the chat with Sophie. "Are you awake? I need your help with something important." The answer came almost immediately, in La Latina, finishing service. "See you in an hour at El Viajero?" El Viajero was our usual meeting place, a bar with a terrace in Plaza de la Paja. I got off at La Latina and walked through the cobbled streets, passing lively bars and packed terraces. Madrid never slept, especially in spring. Sophie was waiting for me at our favorite table on the terrace, with 2 gin and tonics already served. Her chef's apron was peeking out of her bag, and her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail after a night in the kitchen. "What has the witch done this time?" he asked bluntly. In our circle, everyone knew Carmen by that nickname. I told him everything, the reservation at Le Petit Jardin, the rudeness, the comment about my level. Sophie listened, her blue eyes darkening with indignation. When I finished, she took a long sip of her gin and tonic and smiled in a way that reminded me why she was my best ally. "You know, I just bought the old Casa Lucio location," he said casually. Casa Lucio had been one of the most emblematic restaurants in Madrid until its closure the previous year. I was thinking of keeping it a secret until the inauguration, but what do you think if we launch it with a very special dinner? My mind started working at full speed. Casa Lucio wasn't just any restaurant, it was an institution in Madrid, the place where kings and presidents dined. Its location in Cava Baja, in the heart of Madrid de los Austrias, made it even more special. "When are you officially open?" I asked. "In 2 months, but the place is almost ready. We just need to finalize the decoration details and finish training the staff." Sophie paused and looked at me intently. "You know, I've always wanted to have a very exclusive pre-opening dinner. Something intimate, for a few very special people." We spent the next 2 hours planning every detail. Sophie pulled out her iPad and we began to design a menu that would be a masterpiece of subtlety and symbolism. Each dish would tell a story, my story, but in such an elegant way that only the most observant would notice. The first course could be a reinterpretation of the patatas bravas from your parents' bar, Sophie suggested. My parents had owned a bar in Vallecas for 30 years, and their bravas were legendary in the neighborhood. But we will make them with violet potatoes from the Pyrenees and smoked paprika foam. A tribute to your roots with a touch of haute cuisine. While Sophie continued to develop the menu, I started making calls. The first was to Javier, my contact at El País. "Would you be interested in an exclusive about Sophie Martin's new adventure? Casa Lucio is reborn by the most innovative chef in Madrid." I knew that the news would be the front page in the Madrid section. The next call was to Patricia, events director at the Teatro Real. I had helped her last year with a communication crisis, and she owed me a favor. "Patri, do you still have contact with the orchestra's string quartet? I need live music for a very special dinner." My phone vibrated again, another message from Carlos. This time I read it. "Mari, please answer. I'm worried. What my mother did was terrible. I argued with her and I left dinner. I'm at home waiting for you." I sighed and responded with a terse, "I'm fine. I'll be late." Sophie and I continued planning well into the early hours of the morning. Every detail was important: the lighting, the music, the table layout, the wine selection. We wanted to create an experience that went beyond a simple restaurant dinner. "We need more allies," Sophie said as we called for the last round. "I know the best sommelier in Madrid, Alejandro Ruiz. He worked at El Celler de Can Roca and is now looking for a new project." The last name caught my attention. "Ruiz? Isn't he related to?" Sophie smiled. "He's your mother-in-law's nephew, the one the family doesn't mention because he decided to dedicate himself to wine instead of following the family tradition of law." This revelation was pure gold. Alejandro was the black sheep of the Ruiz family, the rebel who had rejected his place at the prestigious family firm to pursue his passion for wine. Carmen never talked about him, although his wines had won several international awards. "We'll also need the right team of waiters," Sophie continued. "I have several people who worked at the Ritz and the Palace. They know how to treat demanding clients and they know all the service protocols." As we walked home through the deserted streets of Madrid, we continued to refine the details. Revenge is a dish best served cold, the saying goes, but in this case it would be a complete tasting menu, served at the perfect temperature. I arrived at my apartment around 3 in the morning. Carlos was asleep on the couch, with the television on in the background. I didn't wake him up. Instead, I sat in my small office and started making lists. I would need all my contacts and resources to make this go perfectly. The guest list would be crucial. In addition to Carmen and Carlos, we needed to fill the restaurant with the right people. I began to review my agenda: ambassadors, directors of multinational companies, recognized artists, all clients of mine at some point. People whose presence would make Carmen feel intimidated but who, at the same time, would treat me with the respect that she had never shown me. We would also need press, but discreet. Photographers who knew how to capture the precise moments without being intrusive. The photos would appear in social magazines weeks later, showing Carmen in what she believed was her moment of glory, without knowing that each image had been carefully planned. Dawn found me still working. Carlos woke up and found me in the office, surrounded by papers and with the laptop on. "Mari, about last night," he began. I interrupted him with a kiss. "Don't worry, honey. In fact, I'm organizing a special dinner to reconcile with your mother. At Sophie's new restaurant." Carlos's face lit up. Like many men trapped between their mother and wife, he always sought peace. "Really? That's wonderful, Mari. Mom will be so honored." If he knew. For the next few weeks, my life became a juggle between my job at the agency and dinner planning. Sophie and I met almost every night to work out details. Alejandro, the rebel sommelier, enthusiastically joined our team. "You know, Aunt Carmen always said that I wasted my life studying wines," he confessed to me one night. "It will be my pleasure to show her how wrong she was." The transformation of the old Casa Lucio was progressing at a good pace. Sophie had respected the essence of the historic premises but added her personal touch. The centuries-old wooden beams were still there, but now they coexisted with modern and discreet lighting. The old tables had been restored, and the linen tablecloths were ordered from an artisan from La Rioja. Every day new details arose to resolve. What music would be played during dinner? The Teatro Real Quartet needed a specific program. What flowers would decorate the tables? We found a small producer in the mountains of Madrid that grew organic varieties. What uniforms would the staff wear? We commissioned exclusive designs from a tailor in the Salamanca neighborhood. One afternoon, while I was reviewing the final details with Sophie in the restaurant kitchen, I received an unexpected call. It was Juan, the maître of Le Petit Jardin. "Ma'am, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened that night," he began. "Mrs. Monteverde has been difficult since then. She told me that Carmen had tried to get another reservation several times, without success. Apparently, his behavior that night had not gone unnoticed. This information gave me an idea. Juan, would you like to be part of something special?" I asked him. I explained our plan, and his response was immediate: "Count me in." In fact, I know several regular customers who would be happy to participate. That's how our little plot grew. Each person who joined added a new level of sophistication to the plan. The Vogue Spain photographer who offered to document the night. The florist who suggested using flower language in the centerpieces. The graphic designer who created the most elegant invitations I had ever seen. The invitations were a separate chapter. After much debate, we opted for a classic design but with a modern touch. Handmade paper in a small workshop in Toledo, traditional Spanish calligraphy, and a silk-lined envelope. Each invitation was a small work of art, and Carmen's was especially personalized. "Dear Mrs. Monteverde de Ruiz," the invitation read. "We have the honor of inviting you to the pre-inauguration dinner of Sophie Martin's new project at the historic Casa Lucio. A unique evening for a select group of personalities from Madrid." The text had been carefully chosen to appeal to his vanity. Meanwhile, my relationship with Carlos was going through interesting times. I saw myself working late on the project, but assumed it was part of my job at the agency. "You're working overtime lately," he commented with concern. "It's because of the mall campaign," I responded, hating having to lie to him but knowing it was necessary. "Carmen, for her part, had been unusually quiet since the incident at Le Petit Jardin. Her Sunday calls to Carlos were shorter than usual, and she had cancelled 2 family lunches citing prior commitments. Guilt was beginning to take its toll on her, something she had never seen before. One night, while dining with Sophie and Alejandro at a small restaurant in Malesana, the sommelier shared a revealing story. "Do you know why Aunt Carmen is the way she is?" he asked while uncorking a bottle of Rioja. His family lost everything during the crisis of '93. He went from living in a mansion in the Salamanca neighborhood to sharing a flat with 3 roommates. He swore that he would never be middle class again and that his children would not be either. This revelation made me see Carmen in a new light. It didn't justify his behavior, but at least it explained it. Maybe our dinner could be more than just revenge. Maybe it could be an opportunity for real change. The days turned into weeks, and every little detail fell into place. The menu was finally closed, 8 dishes that told a story of tradition and modernity, of humble origins and well-deserved success. The winery was carefully selected by Alejandro, including some wines that not even Carmen, with all her boasts of being a connoisseur, would have ever tried. The weeks leading up to the big night became a whirlwind of frenetic activity. The old Casa Lucio was undergoing a complete transformation, and I divided my time between my work at the agency and endless meetings with suppliers, designers, and service staff. Sophie had turned the kitchen into her personal laboratory, experimenting with flavor combinations that would make history. One particularly busy morning, I arrived at the restaurant early to oversee the installation of the new lighting. The place smelled of freshly varnished wood and freshly brewed coffee. Sophie was already in the kitchen, as always, trying different versions of what would be the main dish, a reinterpretation of the Madrid-style tripe that my grandmother used to cook in her small apartment in Vallecas. "Try this," he said, offering me a spoon. The taste instantly transported me back to the Sundays of my childhood. But there was something else, a touch of sophistication that I couldn't place. "White truffle?" I asked. Sophie smiled. "And a touch of aged sherry. Your grandmother would be proud." Alejandro arrived shortly after with a selection of wines for the final tasting. I had spent weeks working on the perfect pairing, looking for small wineries with special stories behind each bottle. "This Albarino," he explained as he uncorked a bottle, "is made by a woman who left her job as an executive in London to recover her family's vineyards in Galicia. It reminded me of you." Decorating the venue was another exciting challenge. We wanted to maintain the spirit of the old Casa Lucio but adding contemporary elements that reflected the new stage. Centuries-old stone walls are now alternated with light wood paneling, and old black and white photographs of celebrities who had dined there mixed with contemporary Spanish art. In a discreet corner, we decided to create a small corner that told my professional story. Framed photographs of successful advertising campaigns, press clippings about awards won, and a small collection of significant objects, the first ad I designed, the award for the best campaign of the year, the cover of the industry magazine that named me Advertiser of the Year. Anus. Rehearsals with the Teatro Real String Quartet were particularly exciting. Patricia had gotten the musicians to create a special program that mixed Spanish classics with elegant versions of popular Madrid songs. When I heard them play a version of El Rey by Las Ventas, the song that was playing in my parents' bar, I almost cried with emotion. The selection of personnel was meticulous. Maria, the former maitre d' of the palace, was in charge of training the front room team. Each waiter was chosen not only for their experience, but for their ability to read situations and adapt to them. We explained the importance of every detail, how to serve the wine, how to present the dishes, how to address each guest. "Remember," Maria told them during rehearsals, "this is not a normal dinner. It is a story that we are going to tell through the service." The waiters practiced over and over, perfecting every movement, every gesture, every word. We even organized full drills with agency staff playing the role of diners. The dinnerware was another important decision. After days of searching, we found a ceramist in Toledo who created unique pieces inspired by Spanish tradition but with a contemporary touch. Each dish was slightly different, with subtle variations in color and texture that made them unique. For dessert, we ordered some special hand-blown glasses from La Granja de San Ildefonso. The centerpieces were designed by Lucia, a florist who had worked at the royal palace. Each arrangement will tell a story, he explained while preparing a prototype. Roses from Aranjuez were mixed with aromatic herbs from the Madrid mountains, creating compositions that were both visual and olfactory. And here, he pointed out a small, almost invisible detail: I will put a rosemary flower, the one you carried in your bridal bouquet. The tablecloths were commissioned from a family workshop in La Rioja that had been making tablecloths for the best restaurants in Spain for generations. We chose a natural linen with a subtle embroidery that reproduced the pattern of the bars of ancient Madrid. Each napkin had the restaurant's initials embroidered in such a fine thread that it was barely noticeable. Staff uniforms were another carefully considered element. We worked with a tailor from the Salamanca neighborhood who had dressed 3 generations of waiters at the Ritz. The suits, a deep black with subtle silver details, were custom-made for each member of the team. The ties, made of Spanish silk, had a small motif reminiscent of the hydraulic tiles of the old Casa Lucio. The wine list deserved a separate chapter. Alexander had created a document that was in itself a work of art. Bound in Spanish leather, each page told the story of the selected wines. There were subtle references to the Ruiz family's winemaking tradition, and a special section dedicated to small producers who, like him, had followed their passion despite family expectations. The glassware was selected piece by piece. Blown crystal glasses for each type of wine, each designed to enhance specific aromas and flavors. For the final toast, Alejandro had gotten some vintage champagne glasses from the 1950s, from when the old Casa Lucio was in its heyday. The physical menu was another element that required special attention. I worked with a graphic designer to create something that was more than just a list of dishes. Each page was a miniature work of art, with hand-drawn illustrations of the main ingredients and little stories about the origin of each dish. The typography was specially designed for the restaurant, mixing elements of traditional Spanish calligraphy with contemporary design. Lighting was another crucial aspect. We hired a lighting designer who had worked on operas at the Teatro Real. Each table would have its own atmosphere, with the lighting perfectly calibrated to enhance both the food and the diners. We installed a system that would allow us to adjust the intensity and color of the light throughout the night, creating different atmospheres for each moment of the dinner. In the kitchen, Sophie had organized her team like a well-trained army. Each cook had a specific role, and they performed full-service rehearsals several times a day. Timing was crucial. Each dish had to come out at the exact moment, at the perfect temperature, with impeccable presentation. Do you know what's most important? Sophie told me one night, as we were checking the order of the dishes for the umpteenth time. Let each bite tell a story. When your mother-in-law tries truffle ham croquettes, she will not only be eating something delicious. She will be tasting the story of how your mother's croquettes at her bar in Vallecas were famous throughout the neighborhood. When try the chocolate dessert with saffron from La Mancha, you will be tasting the story of how you paid for your studies by working summers harvesting saffron. Suppliers became a fundamental part of our history. The ham came from a small producer in Extremadura that had won international awards. The cheese was from a family cheese factory in the mountains of Madrid that only produced when the goats grazed in the high-altitude meadows. The vegetables were from an organic garden in Aranjuez that supplied the best restaurants in the capital. Each day brought new details to resolve. The sound system had to be specially designed so that the quartet's music could be heard perfectly throughout the venue without being intrusive. The glasses had to be tested one by one to ensure they had no imperfections. The dishes were photographed from every possible angle to ensure the presentation was perfect from every point of view. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of the antique mirrors that we had recovered from the original Casa Lucio, I received an unexpected call. It was Carlos. Mari, are you okay? You're so busy lately. I barely see you. Guilt gnawed at me, but I stood my ground. It's a very important project, darling. You'll soon understand why. The week before the dinner, we held a full dress rehearsal. We invited a select group of friends and colleagues to try out the full experience. Every detail was evaluated: the time between courses, the temperature of the wine, the intensity of the light, the volume of the music. We take notes of every comment, every suggestion, every reaction. The days leading up to the event were a flurry of activity. The fresh products began to arrive: wild mushrooms collected in the mountains, fish brought directly from the Galician fish market, aromatic herbs grown especially for us in a small urban garden in Madrid. The night before the big dinner, when everything was ready, Sophie, Alejandro and I sat at the newly installed bar and toasted with a bottle of Cava Reserva. For the most elegant revenge in history, Sophie toasted. For second chances, Alejandro added, perhaps thinking about his own history with the family. For real class, I concluded, thinking about everything I had learned in this process. The day to send out the invitations came sooner than I expected. I was in my office at the agency, looking at the special envelope we had prepared for Carmen. It was different from the others, not only because of its content, but because of what it represented. The Italian roll, handmade at a small Amalfi workshop, had a soft ivory tone that contrasted perfectly with black ink calligraphy. He had carefully chosen the time to send it. He knew for Carlos that Carmen had her bridge party at the Campo Club, and always reviewed her correspondence during Friday's breakfast. The invitation would arrive just in time so that he could boast of her during her weekly lunch with her friends in the Zalacane. Before sending Carmen's invitation, I had coordinated with Maria, my assistant, sending the rest of the invitations. Each envelope had been personally delivered by messengers dressed in suit, a small extravagance that knew that it would generate comments in the social circles of Madrid. The recipients had been carefully selected: the ambassador of France and his wife, 2 government ministers, several multinational directors, a couple of aristocrats known for their love for gastronomy, and of course, the most influential gastronomic critics in Spain. The answer had been immediate and enthusiastic. In less than 24 hours, we had confirmations of almost all guests. The French ambassador had personally called Sophie to express his emotion to prove his new gastronomic proposal. The Countess of Romanwans had sent a handwritten note thanking the invitation and mentioning that she would advance her return of Biarritz specifically to attend. For Carmen's invitation, she had chosen a special messaging service that used luxury cars for her deliveries. The envelope would be delivered in a Mercedes Class S black, by a messenger dressed in custom suit. A small detail that knew that she would appreciate and comment with her friends. "Are you sure this?" Sophie asked me when I told him the details of the shipment. We were in the restaurant kitchen, where she supervised the arrival of the first new teams. "Knowing your mother-in-law, you will investigate thoroughly before accepting." He was right, of course. Carmen was known for her meticulousness in social matters. Before accepting any invitation, I always investigated who would most attend, what was expected of it, and more importantly, how the event could socially benefit. That's why we had prepared the land carefully. In recent weeks, he had coordinated with several French journalists to publish articles about the next opening of the restaurant. Vogue Spain had published a Sophie profile, highlighting its career and mentioning the new project. The country had dedicated a complete article to the history of the old House Lucio and its next reinvention. We had even got a society blog to filter the partial list of guests to the pre-inauguration dinner. The invitation itself was a work of art. The outside, on Italian paper, bore Carmen's full name carefully calligraphy, Dona Carmen Monteverde de Ruiz. Inside, the main invitation was printed on Japanese washi paper, with a delicate water pattern that remembered the old invitations of the Spanish court. The text had been carefully elaborated to appeal to his vanity. Sophie Martin has the honor of inviting Mrs. Carmen Monteverde de Ruiz to the pre-inauguration dinner of her new gastronomic project in the historic House Lucio. A unique evening reserved for a select group of personalities of Madrid. Attached to the main invitation, I had included a personal note from Sophie, written by hand on paper with a retail letterhead: "Dear Dona Carmen, her reputation as a connoisseur of the Madrid high gastronomy precedes me. It would be an honor to have her presence in this special night. He had also included a smaller envelope with the preliminary list of confirmed guests. He knew that this particular detail would capture his attention. See the names of ambassadors, ministers, and aristocrats in the same list that his would be irresistible for Carmen. While the messenger headed to Carmen's house in the Salamanca neighborhood, I tried to concentrate on my work at the agency. We had an important presentation for a new client, but my mind did not stop returning to that envelope traveling through the streets of Madrid. Carlos called me in mid-morning. "Mari, do you know something about a dinner at home, Lucio? My mother has just received an invitation and is very excited." He could imagine Carmen in her living room, examining every detail of the invitation with her social magnifying glass. "Yes, it is Sophie's new project. Can your mother attend?" "He is calling all her friends to see who has been invited more," Carlos replied with a laugh. I think I had never seen her so excited about a dinner. Little he knew that this was exactly the effect we were looking for. At lunchtime, I received a text message from Carmen. It was the first time that I wrote me directly in months. "Maria del Carmen, I just received the invitation for dinner at Casa Lucio. What a coincidence, your friend Sophie is the chef. I suppose we will see each other there." The formal answer came that afternoon, in an elegant envelope as the one we had sent. Carmen had followed the protocol to the letter, as expected. His answer, written on personal letter with his monogram, confirmed his assistance and Carlos's. That night, during dinner at home, Carlos could not contain his enthusiasm. "Do you know that the French ambassador will be at dinner? And the Countess of Roman ones too. Mom is delighted." I just smiled and nodded, while internally I reviewed the next steps of the plan. The following days were an activity whirlwind. Carmen had begun her own research on the event, calling her contacts in the world of Madrid restoration for more information. Each person with whom he spoke confirmed the exclusive of the event, feeding his ego and his anticipation. One morning, while supervising the last details at the restaurant, I received an unexpected call. It was Carmen again. "Maria del Carmen, dear, I was thinking. Maybe you could help me choose the right dress for dinner. After all, you know Sophie's style better and the atmosphere you seek to create." This call was a turning point. For the first time in 5 years, Carmen was asking me for advice. The irony did not escape. "Of course, Carmen. What do you think if we are in the Ritz to have tea and discuss it?" Tea with Carmen was a surreal experience. Sitting in the elegant hall of Ritz, with the afternoon Madrid filtering through the historical windows, we discussed fabrics, colors and styles. Carmen had brought photographs of 3 dresses she was considering, all of renowned Spanish designers. "This belonging is beautiful," I said, pointing out a burgundy dress. "And the color would perfectly complement the decoration of the restaurant." Carmen took mental note, nodding with approval. "You have a good eye, Maria del Carmen. I have always thought about it, although I have not always said it." While Carmen talked about shoes and jewels, I thought about how our dynamics had changed. The woman who had just humiliated me in Le Petit Jardin now sought my approval. The power of social exclusivity was something she understood perfectly, and now she was playing according to her rules. The days before dinner, Carmen regularly called details. What kind of jewels would be more appropriate? Should I carry a chow? What time would it be better to arrive? Each call was a small victory, a reminder of how the screws had changed. One afternoon, while reviewing the last details with Sophie in the kitchen, we reflected on how everything had evolved. "Do you know what is the most ironic?" Sophie said as we tried the final dessert. "That all this started with her excluding you from a dinner, and is now desperate to be included in yours." The eve of the dinner, I received a last message from Carmen. "Maria del Carmen, I wanted to thank you for your help with the preparations. It means a lot for me to share this experience with you and with Carlos." I read the message several times, looking for the usual condescending tone, but for the first time, it seemed genuinely sincere. That night, while preparing my own dress for dinner, I thought about how a simple envelope had changed things so much. The invitation had not only been returned, it had completely transformed the dynamics of our relationship. Tomorrow would be the final test. The day of dinner dawned with a perfectly blue sky over Madrid, one of those spring days that make the city look taken from a postcard. I arrived at the restaurant at 7 in the morning, although dinner would not start until 9 o'clock at night. Sophie was already in the kitchen, of course, supervising the arrival of the latest fresh products. The mushrooms just arrived from the Sierra, he informed me while trying a sauce. And the fish will arrive in an hour directly from the Lonja de Vigo. The kitchen was a hotbed of controlled activity, each chef concentrated in its specific task. The air smelled of fresh herbs and freshly baked bread. The florists arrived shortly after, transforming the space with their creations. Each centerproof was a miniature work of art, with roses from Aranjuez and aromatic herbs of the Madrid mountain range creating compositions that were both visual and olfactory. The subtle aroma of flowers mixed with the smells emanating from the kitchen, creating an intimosfere. Alejandro appeared in mid-morning, dressed in an impeccable suit and loading the last bottles of wine specially selected for the occasion. "Did you know that Aunt Carmen collects vinos?" he told me while organizing the winery. "But this Rioja has never tried. It is from a cellar so small that it only produces 300 bottles a year." The service team arrived at 4 in the afternoon for the final briefing. Maria, la maître, once again reviewed the service order and the details of each guest. We had created small chips with information about each diner, preferences, allergies, and important details about their relationships with other guests. "Remember," Maria emphasized, "tonight we not only serve food. We serve a story." The waiters, dressed in their new black uniforms with silver details, listened carefully while reviewing the choreography of the service. Each movement had been tested until perfection. The Real Theater Quartet reached 6 for the final trial. Violins' notes echoed in space while trying the acoustics of the premises. They had prepared a program that mixed Spanish classical music with elegant versions of Madrid popular songs. When they started playing a version of Madrid, 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 I felt a chill in advance. At 7, I went up to the small office that we had enabled on the first floor to change. My dress, an exclusive design by Lorenzo Caprile in emerald green, waited hung on a coat rack. It was elegant but not ostentatious, exactly what I needed for tonight. While makeup me, I could listen to the bustle of the final preparations on the floor below. Carlos arrived at 8, before his mother, as we had agreed. He was speechless when he saw the transformation of the premises. "Mari, this is incredible. How have you maintained all this in secret?" I smiled as he adjusted his bow tie. I had good reasons to be discreet. The first guests began arriving at 8:30. The French ambassador and his wife were the first, closely followed by the Minister of Culture and several multinational directors. The lobby quickly filled the murmur of conversations in Spanish, French and English, mixed with the soft sound of the string quartet. At the fourth 9, Carmen's black Mercedes stopped in front of the restaurant. From my position at the top of the stairs, I could see her getting out of the car. He had chosen the belonging dress that I suggested, and wore his best jewels. Carlos went down to receive her while I watched her reaction. The moment Carmen crossed the door was exactly as she had imagined. His eyes opened with surprise to see the transformation of space, and then with something close to shock by recognizing several of the guests. The French ambassador immediately approached him to greet her, a detail that we had previously coordinated. "Carmen, dear," I greeted her, lowering the staircase. "You are spectacular." For the first time since I knew her, she seemed genuinely surprised to see me in my element. Before I could answer, Sophie appeared by my side. "Dona Carmen, it is an honor to have her here tonight. Maria del Carmen has told me a lot about you." Carmen's expression ranged from confusion and fascination while Sophie guided her to the main hall. The quartet began to play a piece of Manuel de Falla while the waiters circulated with cups of Cava Rosado, a Reventos y Blanc Gran Reserva that Alejandro had specifically selected to open the evening. The arrangement of the tables had been carefully planned. Carmen and Carlos were sitting at a central table, surrounded by some of the most prestigious guests. From his position, he had a perfect view of the entire room and could be seen by all, something he knew he would appreciate. Sophie appeared to present the first dish, a reinterpretation of the ham croquettes that my mother used to do in her Vallecas bar. This dish, Sophie told the entire room, is inspired by a family recipe by Maria del Carmen. A proof that true gastronomy does not understand social classes. I saw how Carmen took her first bite, how her eyes closed briefly by recognizing the familiar taste but elevated to a new level. The Iberian acorn ham was mixed with black truffle and a touch of Jerez anejo, creating an explosion of flavors that honored the original recipe while transforming it into something new. Every dish that followed told a part of my story. The Cordoba salmorejo with bogavant remembered my summers working on the coast to pay my studies. The hake and green sauce with clams was a tribute to train trips to Galicia to visit my grandparents. Each presentation was a work of art, each flavor a memory transformed into haute cuisine. Between dish and dish, I watched Carmen interacted with the other guests. I saw her talk animatedly with the Countess of Roman ones about contemporary art, discuss policy with the Minister of Culture, exchange cards with the director of the Royal Theatre. I was in his element, but for the first time, I was also in mine. In the middle of dinner, Alejandro approached our table to present a special wine. This Rioja, he explained, is from a small family winery that I decided to support when I left the law firm. I saw how Carmen's eyes enlarged by recognizing her nephew, the family rebel who was now respected internationally in the world of wine. The initial tension was dissolved with each dish, with each glass of wine, with each new conversation. I saw how Carmen's superiority mask was cracking, replaced by something more authentic. I saw her observe me while interacting with the guests, while Sophie introduced me as her partner and friend, while the waiters treated me with a respect that went beyond professional courtesy. The crucial moment came with the dessert. Sophie had created a masterpiece, a black chocolate sphere that melted into contact with a hot saffron sauce, revealing an interior of Madagascar vanilla ice cream with pieces of nougat from Jejona. This dessert, Sophie announced, represents the transformation. How something apparently simple can reveal layers of complexity when the opportunity is given. While the guests applauded the spectacular final, I saw tears in Carmen's eyes. They were not tears of humiliation, as perhaps he had imagined at the beginning when he planned tonight. They were tears of understanding, recognition. After the dessert, while the guests enjoyed drinks and digestive, Carmen approached me at a quiet moment. "Maria del Carmen," he began, and for the first time he did not sound condescending, "I have been a fool." I looked at her, allowing silence to spread between us. All this time. I have been so wrong all this time. The rest of the night passed as a dream. The guests began to say goodbye near midnight, each taking a small box with artisanal sweets prepared by Sophie. Gastronomic critics promised star reviews, businessmen wanted to make reservations for corporate events, the aristocrats already planned their next visits. Carmen was one of the last to leave. I saw her stop at the door, looking one last time the space that had witnessed her transformation. "Maria del Carmen," he said before getting into his car, "I'm proud to have you as daughter-in-law." And for the first time in 5 years, his words sounded completely sincere. When the last guest had gone, when the waiters began to collect the empty glasses and the quartet kept their instruments, I sat at an empty table with Sophie and Alejandro. We decorch our one last bottle of champagne and provide silently. "Do you know what is the most incredible?" Sophie said as we watched the dawn from the restaurant's terrace. "That you have achieved your revenge without a drop of malice. You have transformed resentment into something beautiful." He was right, of course. What had begun as a revenge plan had become something else, a lesson on true class, about transformation, about the power of authenticity. Carmen had arrived waiting to confirm her prejudices and had encountered a truth that she could not ignore. The days following dinner were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. The morning after the event, while drinking coffee on my Chambéry terrace, the first reviews began to arrive. The gastronomic critic of El País had published an enthusiastic criticism in the digital edition. Casa Lucio is reborn with a proposal that revolutionizes the Madrid gastronomic scene. Social networks boiled with photos and comments of the guests, each more praise than the previous one. But the real change was not in criticism or photos, but in something deeper and personal. The first signal came in the form of a bouquet of flowers sent to my office. Blancas roses, my favorites, although I did not remember having never mentioned Carmen. The card was brief but significant. Thank you for opening my eyes. With love, Carmen. Carlos was baffled by the transformation in his mother's attitude. I don't understand what happened last night, he told me during breakfast on the following Sunday. Mom doesn't stop talking about you, how proud he has to have you in the family, how impressive you are. I smiled on my coffee cup, keeping me the details of planning months. The next surprise came a week later, when Carmen invited me to have tea at her home in the Salamanca neighborhood. It was the first time that I was invited without a mandatory family occasion. The stately floor, which I had before intimidating me with its antiques and family portraits, now seemed different, more cozy. Maria del Carmen, she started while serving tea in ancient porcelain cups. I need to tell you a story. And so, between pasta and Earl Grey tea, Carmen revealed her own past, one who had never shared with me. He told me about his childhood in a wealthy family, of the bankruptcy that changed everything, of the difficult years living of appearances. When I met Carlos, he continued, we had just recovered part of our social position. I swore that we would never be common. He paused, looking out the window to Serrano Street. But you have taught me that true class has nothing to do with money or last name. While listening to her, I thought about how my own perspective had changed. What had begun as a revenge plan had become something more significant, a bridge between two worlds, a lesson on true values. Sophie called that afternoon with exciting news. The reservations for the restaurant were complete for the next 3 months, and had received requests from several important events, including a dinner for the royal family. Do you know what is best? He told me with a laugh in my voice. Your mother-in-law has asked for a fixed table for Sundays. The transformation of my relationship with Carmen extended beyond family dinners and cordial conversations. He began to invite me to social events that were previously its exclusive territory, lunches in the field club, beneficial meetings, exhibition inaugurations. But now it was different. I no longer felt like an intruder, and she didn't treat me as such. One day, while we took a snack on the terrace of Ritz, Carmen surprised me with a confession. Do you know? I always wanted to have a daughter, he said as he removed his vermouth. When Carlos married you, instead of seeing a chance, I let myself be blinded by my prejudices. How dumb I was. The restaurant, meanwhile, had become the fashion place in Madrid. Sophie had achieved her first Michelin star in record time, and criticism could not be better. The waiting list was so long that we had to implement a special reservation system. Alejandro had also found his place in the Ruiz family. Carmen began to show off her nephew sommelier with the same enthusiasm with which she previously boasted of her lawyers. He even organized a wine tasting at home, inviting her friends from the bridge club so that Alejandro presented their special selection. One afternoon, while checking the mail in the office, I found an invitation that left me speechless. It was for the annual gala of the Ladies' Association of the Spanish Aristocracy, an ultra-private event that Carmen attended for years. The attached manuscript note said, Dear Maria del Carmen, I would like to present yourself as my successor in the organizing committee. Carlos could not believe the change in our family dynamics. It's as if you were her best friend, she said one night after a particularly pleasant dinner at her parents' house. I had never seen her so relaxed, so happy. The real test came during Christmas holidays. For the first time, Carmen suggested that we celebrate Christmas Eve in my parents' bar in Vallecas, something that would have been unthinkable before. Seeing Carmen sitting at a formic table, enjoying my mother's croquettes and laughing with my father's stories, was the definitive confirmation that the change was real. These croquettes, Carmen said while taking another. Now I understand where the inspiration for Sophie's plate came from. My mother, who had never felt comfortable in Carmen's presence, smiled proudly. The recipe is from my grandmother, he explained, and for the first time, the two women began a real conversation about family kitchen and traditions. The success of the restaurant continued to grow. Sophie and I decided to expand the concept, opening a more casual space in the Vallecas neighborhood, near the bar of my parents. Carmen not only supported the idea, but offered to be an investment. Good food is good food, no matter the postal code, he said, citing the words Sophie had used during the opening dinner. A spring morning, almost a year after that night that changed everything, I received a package in the office. Inside there was an old photo album and a note from Carmen. I found these photos of when I was your age. You may be interested who believe we should be. The photos showed a young, smiling, in everyday situations, eating in a modest restaurant, laughing with friends on a terrace, working in an office. It was like looking at a completely different person, and at the same time, he was exactly the person who had come to know in the last year. The restaurant became our regular meeting point. Carmen and I started a tradition of weekly lunches, where we shared not only exceptional food but also stories, advice and laughs. Sophie always joined us at the end, and we were all forming an unlikely but genuine friendship. Do you know what is the most ironic? Carmen told me during one of these lunches. That all this started because I excluded you from a dinner. Now I can't imagine a good dinner without you. We provide with a glass of wine selected by Alejandro, laughing at how life turns. The last surprise came in the form of an unexpected proposal. Carmen had decided to write her memoirs and wanted me to help her. No one better than you to tell a transformation story, he told me. In addition, I think we have much to teach how to overcome prejudices and social barriers. So here we are, a year later, sitting on the terrace of the restaurant that changed our lives, planning a book on transformation and second opportunities. Sophie has just brought a new dessert that she is developing, and Carmen is giving her expert opinion about the perfect pairing. The sweetest victory was not to humiliate Carmen or show him that she was wrong. The true victory was to discover that, under the layers of social prejudices and expectations, there was a person capable of changing, recognizing their mistakes, and forming a genuine connection. The class, Carmen told me recently, it is not something that is inherited or purchased. It is something that is demonstrated in how you treat others. Coming from her, those words meant more than any revenge that could have planned. And so, what began as a revenge plan became a story of redemption, human connection, and the true elegance that comes from being authentic. The taste of this victory is sweet not for the triumph over someone, but for the triumph with someone.